Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Wednesday webinar. This is episode 21, and today we're going to be joined by Paula Hunter, a past president of the FRYSCKy Coalition, as well as Assistant FRYSC Director Marianne Jennings, who are going to be talking to us about how to advocate for FRYSCK in general and for our FRYSC centers. We'll turn it over to these two great ladies in just a moment. Very quickly, our agenda today, what's going to be covered in this webinar. First and foremost, how to identify your legislators and other stakeholders and how to reach, find contact information on them and so on. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about building an advocacy network because we are one voice. And when we can build a network of voices that communicate our message, then we can be much more effective in our advocacy. Third, we're going to talk very quickly about what that message is that we're crafting that we want to get out to various stakeholders. A quick reminder that while advocacy probably triggers thoughts of advocating with our state legislators, our state government, cabinet officials, KDE, and so forth, a lot of advocacy happens right at home in local and through local efforts with local officials and local community partners. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we're going to talk very specifically about some of the formal advocacy that is being done on our and your behalf through the FRYSCKy Coalition. Let me go one more slide here. So who are my decision makers for FRYSCK? And again, some of these are kind of obvious when we think of state government and we think about things kind of top down. We start with the governor and then the legislature. And so our various state legislatures, our state legislators, both our senators and our state representatives. And again, we'll talk about how to identify who those are, both for your home where you live and also your center. But then don't forget that, like I said, advocacy isn't just at the state level. A lot of advocacy is going to happen right in your community. And so at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Paula Hunter, who's going to talk to us about this last point. And I'm going to let Marianne and Paula, who teamed up in advocacy for a long time, take it away. So thank you so much for tuning in. And thanks for being here.
I've had my school board members come and serve cookies and snacks at my Ready Fest, and my local county judge, they always come to my safety day, but I always make sure that I invite them and know who they are, get to know them, and get to know your school board members. I've sat down and talked with all of my school board members, but I also attend school board meetings whenever possible. One of the monthly school board meetings. I usually go to probably 90% of them each year. And then when they read the donations and read the programs that are going on, I'm there in case they have any questions.
Because while we talk about our public policy committee and our legislators and governors with the funding, a lot of times your county and city officials can have access to funds. And then your school board members clearly have an impact on the work you're doing in the school system. So advocacy isn't always about money, because we know that some decision makers are working with the way that you can implement your program in your school and in your centers too. So we just wanted to make sure that you all understood that there's a big picture of advocacy to lots of different folks, and sharing the mission and the vision of what your center does and the work that you do is really important to a wide group of people. So let's do a question. How comfortable are you contacting your legislator? So Greg's going to launch that poll for us. So we just want to see, what's your comfort level in contacting your legislator? And I even answered. Is that allowed?
It is. All right, they're coming in. We've got 28 of 34 folks in. I'll give it just another minute. 30 of 34. We got 88%. We'll give it just a couple more seconds. There's 4 more of you. If you could quick click on that poll. All right, I think that's as high as we're going to. Oh, 31. There we go. We got to the 90s. Here we go. And here are the results.
Great. So it looks like that about 45%, about half of you are somewhat comfortable, and then 16% are comfortable, and then we've got 20%, 19% very comfortable. And so so that's great that we do have a wide range, and then we also have 19% who are not comfortable. And so one thing as we go on to the next slide, thanks for doing that poll, Greg. And as we move on to the next slide, I want us to be able to talk about our comfort level, and also Paula and I can share. So we're going through a redistricting now, so your legislator may change. And for me, my senator, I feel sure is going to change. And so I've had the same senator for, a few years now. So I'm rethinking this as well. What kind of contacts can I make in order to share the information about our FRYSC? And so I'm rethinking this too. What's my message going to be? How am I going to contact them? And so I think it's important to remember that your legislators are just they're normal people like you and I. It just happens that they hold this position. And so one thing that I'm actually my personal plan is to actually reach out to them personally via email and ask for a phone call. And but I think it's important to remember that I know for myself, and I don't know about Paula, but I was very uncomfortable doing that in the beginning. I wasn't sure what to do or what to say. But once I realized and started talking with legislators, they really are just normal people like you and I, and have some of the same concerns, issues, and things facing them. And so once you think about it that way and take away the title maybe and think about the person, then it became easier for me to do that. Paula, do you have some input on that for folks who may not be as comfortable?
Yes, and have patience. I contacted my senator last Thursday and left a message, and he texted me back and said he would contact me as soon as he got a chance, and that was yesterday. So you have to have patience, because I kept thinking maybe he's not going to call me back, maybe he will, and finally he did. But have patience. I know they have a lot on their plate, but most of them will return your call eventually.
So when you're looking at who your legislators are at the state level, I wanted to share this screenshot with you, and Greg actually shared the link in the chat. And so if you are even unsure of who your legislators are, this map hasn't changed officially online because we're still going through the redistricting process. But even if you want to know who it is now, and that may be changing, you can follow the link that Greg submitted, and then there's a search bar there at the top, and you type in your mailing address or your physical address, not purchase orders. And then you click this. Once you hit enter, there will be a little blue icon that will pop up, and you click next to that icon and it'll tell you who your legislators are. So it's a really good resource if you aren't sure who your person is, that you can use this, and then that way you can identify who they are. And then you can also click, once you've identified them on there, to let you click in and find ways to communicate and reach out to them too. So it's a really good, Find Your Legislator is a really good resource for you to use. Okay, so Greg says you can use the Zoom on the link on the map. Oh, so it's a live link. I didn't know that. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, and that could be handy too if you want to check maybe your home representatives as well as your school representatives and so on.
So now that we know who we want to talk to, we talk a lot about, when you're talking about advocacy, it's really sharing your message. Sometimes there are some confusion about advocacy and lobbying. And so I just want to take a couple of minutes to clarify those differences. So when we're asking you to advocate, or you hear from the coalition about advocating for your centers, we're just asking you to share information. There's nothing wrong with sharing information with legislators. Anything that is informational is okay. That's not considered lobbying. You can do that from your work computer. You can do that from your work time. All of that's allowable. When you cross that line into lobbying is when you're actually asking the legislator, based on information, a bill, things that you wanted them to actually make change. So if you were to if there was a budget bill that reduced our funding, and we sent out a call to action that says, please contact your legislator and ask them not to cut our funds, then that's considered lobbying. And so that's something you would want to do on your own time. But we know that sharing information with legislators, stakeholders, and other decision makers throughout the entire year is what makes it most powerful. We also know the more people that are carrying the message, the more powerful that it is. So we wanted to take a few minutes to actually talk about and think about the idea that you don't really have to be the only messenger, and you don't have to be the only one carrying that message. You have a lot of folks that are very vested in your programs and who are key stakeholders that work with your program every day that can carry that message for you, right? So you have lots of folks that are involved. So you don't have to be that only messenger. And it's really important to think about that and to take time ahead of time throughout the year and think about who can help me carry this important message about the work that Family Resource and Youth Services Centers do. So, let's take a minute, and we're going to ask you to actually come off mute or put in the chat and let's take a minute and think about building your local network. So come off chat and let's think about 3 people who are vested in your program and can advocate for you. Who'd like to come off chat and share? Paula, you want to get them started with yours?
Well, my teachers are some who can advocate for me, and they know what I do, and my advisory council chair. Those are some of them that I would use to advocate. And then some of my community members, like our county attorney, different people in the community.
Right. I'm seeing a lot of advisory councils in the chat, right?
Yes.
So what kinds of people on your, let's be a little more specific. Who on your advisory council is identifying? I used to, when I was a coordinator, I worked with a local legal advocacy group. They were great at communicating for me. I've got students on here. Students and parents are great advocates. Students, parents, teachers, advisory council, community members. Superintendents. Ooh, nice one. Yeah.
Great.
A finance coordinator at our local college is on the advisory council. Small business owners who help us with our programs. That's a great idea. Ooh, faith leaders. Yeah, that's an awesome one.
Our ministerial association, they're wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Those are all good ideas. Any other ideas? Health department directors on your advisory council. That's a good one. CASA workers, CDWs. You guys are really creative. Lots of good ideas coming in. Chamber of Commerce, Better Business Groups. Any board or community group that you're serving on, there's no reason, if you're being a part of their group, there's no reason that you wouldn't ask them to help when you're trying to communicate something, right? So there's a good pool to pull from, say that 3 times, right? And so you can look to those folks where you're serving on their boards too. 4-H group, that's a good one. Yeah.
And we all know we serve on a lot of boards, CASA boards, fair teams. We serve on a lot of different programs. So like Marianne said, it doesn't hurt to ask them. We're helping them.
Yeah, United Way. That's right. And you'll hear us say Exploited Children's Help Organization. That's a good one. And you'll hear us say quite a bit that this communication doesn't just happen during the legislative session or one time a year. It's going to be ongoing and throughout the year. Healthy Community Council, Unite. Those are all really good. Save 2 Children. Is that supposed to be Save the Children? Or is that a new group? I don't, okay. There you go. Okay, great. So a couple of things we've covered so far. So we know who our stakeholders are, who we want to share a message with. We've talked a little bit about that. We've also talked about that we don't have to share our message alone, that we have lots of networks that we're part of out there that can help us share a message. So those are all good, 2 really good pieces that we've talked about to remember. So we're going to move on to creating your message and crafting your message. So when you think about the message that you're going to send, you want to think about what would be good information for your legislator to know. So think about buzzwords or phrases for your audience. I can give one example at the state level that I can give you is for a couple of years, we had a legislator, and when our director, Melissa Goins, would testify in front of a committee, there was a lot of questions about return on investment. And so that legislator would always ask, what's our return on investment? And we were always collecting information about cash and in kind. And so we realized when we're starting to get that question, that's a good way to discuss our return on investment by showing the amount of funds that we're collecting by cash and in kind. So that would be a buzzword or a phrase that we used or we saw that was just coming to the forefront each time and that we needed to work on with our messaging. Paula, do you have any other buzzwords that you can think of that have been important with your message?
I don't really have any buzzwords, but
okay.
But I know a lot of things. I like to get out there that we do more than basic needs. I think sometimes they forget that. That's not really a buzzword or phrase, but when I'm talking with them, I like to say, because I know one of our senators, in case we get an increase, he says, well, they can buy more coats. Well, we do more than that, buy coats for kids. So, I try to talk to them about, we do more than that. It's not really a buzzword or phrase, but.
Right. We have, if you know that your legislator, the person you're crafting information for, is very active in or they work in healthcare, and your center does a lot in healthcare, then you're going to want to craft that message around something that shows them the impact you're having on the health of your students and families. So that's one way you can do it. If you have a legislator that's in the work world or a stakeholder that you're wanting to communicate with, and so your center's doing a lot of work around employment and engaging students in career readiness, then that's the kind of information you want to share. You want to be mindful of your audience, of who your audience is, and what kind of information is interesting to them, and try to target it around that as well. So think of a time during the last year you feel you made a strong impact on a student, family, or program. So when you're crafting your message, you want to think back. When were some times that I really felt like I had done a really good job, or that there was a family that really I made a difference in their lives, and they've shared that with me? And so you want to always kind of have those in your mind as you're crafting messages, and be mindful of the times when you feel like you've really made a difference. At the state level, we're asking you to submit impact reports, and we're sharing those a lot with our stakeholders at the state level. And that's something you can share at your local level too. So you could start with that. Start with your impact report that you send into our to the state level. Use that as part of your message. Think about a student or family that wouldn't mind. And I would always ask the student or family, do you mind if I share your story? And they may or may not say yes, but you definitely want to get their permission before you share that. But I know there are so many families and students that you've made an impact on that would really kind of make that personal connection with the stakeholder that you're sharing with, so they could understand a little bit better what you're doing. Paula, do you have suggestions on that one?
No, like I said, the stories help. They help when you talk about them. I talked to my legislator. And our community depends on us. It's not just the students and the family, but our community, and our community members. I had a family I had a community member contact me and say there was a family living in their vehicle. So then I had to track it down and get referrals, and I knew where to go. So, you could talk about those stories, like you said, without using names or whatever.
And you may think it sounds insignificant, but it's really significant. It's a big deal, the work you're doing. And a lot of the things that we see every day that centers are doing, sometimes we take that for granted. But not everyone knows your story or knows the work that you're doing. So even the small things that you're doing are important and good things to share, because you're making a difference. We talked about the individual stories of impact and great messages for key decision makers. So we talked a little bit about that. So, there's always going to be those really important stories that you're going to really formalize and have ready to share when that time comes. And then don't forget your data. There are lots of data that you can pull from in order to show the difference you're making. You have infinite campus reports. You have information, the unenrolled, you're doing in FRYSC counts. And it's always good to have some data that you can share with legislators or decision makers. I know that Tanya releases the regional impact report information too. So you can use the information you have there at your center. You can also pull some regional information if that would be helpful as well. But you have those impact reports. We ask you to pull that at least one activity that shows impact. And so don't forget those kinds of data sets that are really key when you're talking with decision makers to show that impact. I think it's always good to have a mix of all of those, the data that you have, and then also those personal stories is a well-rounded message. Anything else before we move on, Paula, you can think of when crafting your message?
No, and I think the data is important. And I think sometimes, and I know many coordinators, I think people in our buildings and different things don't realize how important it is, to write every little thing down and put it in Infinite Campus. Why we have to put in, that Johnny got this or got school supplies or food. And it not only helps with our data, but it also helps us when we go, we can go back and look and see when we last gave it to them or help with the impact. But it is important. And sometimes it's hard to get others to understand that, why we have to have a name to put in Infinite Campus or information. So for our data.
So would anybody be brave enough to come off of mute and actually share something that you would tell, that a story that you feel like would be relevant that you would tell your legislator? No brave souls out there?
Would you like to at least do a chat blast?
Sure, let's do a chat blast.
I have something I could say.
Okay, great. Yeah.
One of the things that I share with my legislator, and I don't do the weekly backpacks snacks, but I do a monthly box of food. And at Christmas, we have a lot of extra food that we put in. And what I do at Christmas time is I invite the legislators and the school superintendent, and we all pack boxes. And I have about 35 families on my list. And when the legislator first came, his name is Matt Lockett. He was newly representative of our district, and he did not have any idea how many grandparents were raising grandchildren. And that really opened his eyes to a lot. And he's done it for a second year this year. We have a new senator, Tom Beefer used to be our senator from here, but Dr. Douglas is our new person. I haven't got to meet him yet. I invited him, but he couldn't come. But that was one way to invite them to help me with something that I'm doing. And it gives them a feeling of participating and shows them where the needs are.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. That's really good. And that I think you've shared what I feel like is important. When you work in your school every day, you know how many grandparents are or relatives are helping with kids or help raising kids. But, everyday people or folks don't necessarily understand, if you don't work in that school, how many people are that is really happening. So it's always good to share that information to help people understand the families that we're working with too. So that was really a great example. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share?
So I have one that I would like to share. This was during COVID. We were not in school at the time, and I had a parent reach out to me on Remind, and I feel like that was one way that I was really able to connect with my families, because they could kind of contact me anytime. And I had one mother that told me that they were in an emergency situation and they needed help. And so I'm chatting with her through Remind, and I said, well, just, call 911. And so she let me know that they were in a situation where she could text me, but she could not call 911 because the person would hear her call 911, and her daughter, she felt like were in harm, in danger. So I was actually driving to school. So I come to school and I call 911 for the family. The police go out and check on the family. And it ended up being that the police didn't find anything at the time, but I chatted with the lady later that day, and I felt like she was really in an abusive relationship. So I was able to send her information about our domestic violence shelter, and I sent all of that through Remind, and so she had it on her phone. And so then months go by and I don't really hear much from her, but when she came to sign her kids up for Christmas, she said, I just want to let you know that really helped me. And she said, I took that information you gave me and we were able to get out. And they had gone through the Shelter of Hope and they helped them find a new house and, a place to live. So I feel like I'm still a new coordinator because I started in the fall of 19. So the pandemic hit and I was only 6 months into this job. So I don't know where to share those stories. I need help with that. I feel like that's a successful story, and but I'm unclear of where to share that at.
Great. That's a great example, Tracy, of how you were able to help a family. And I would start by asking that mom, I think it was a mom you were communicating with. I would start by asking if she was comfortable with you sharing her story with or without her name. Okay. And if it's without her name, if she's okay with you sharing, then you could change the name. But then I think I would put that in writing, have a written account of that you've showed that you've made a difference. And then you can share that both written and verbally with your legislator. You can send an email and say, hey, I wanted to share with you a family that we were able to work with and help and share their story of impact through our center. And so, but I would have that you could share verbally and written, I think would be helpful. Paula, do you have suggestions on those stories? How to share those?
That's probably what I would do if I had one to share. I would get their permission, just like you said, Mary Ann. And whether or not to use their name, most of the time I change it if they give me permission, but still to share, that's perfect.
Thank you.
Exactly what I would do.
Yeah. And one thing we hear from legislators, especially, and that's where most of my experience lies. So most of my experience lies with working with the legislators. And so I want to share that. So when I say that, that's just where most of my experience lies. But, this can work with any of your stakeholders. But legislators say that they want an individual message. A message that is a form letter doesn't necessarily catch their eye when you're communicating via email. And that's their communication of preference anymore is email. But the ones that look like that they are just form letters don't necessarily catch their eye. So something like that, Tracy, would be a great idea to use to just share and say, I wanted to reach out to you and share with you the difference that we're making here in our center. So
one other thing that I thought was, I feel like it's important. I know we've all been through so many different things with COVID and trying to figure out how to move forward and still help families. And there have been a lot of barriers, but in this instance, I feel like that since she was able to send me a message through Remind, and I feel like we've used those communications more so during COVID. I feel like that's more of a positive that has come out of this. She was more comfortable sending me a message and, instead of making a phone call or, I think it's opened up some communication with our families.
Right. Sometimes those face-to-face conversations are really hard, right? Even in our own lives, we know that it's a little harder sometimes to start the conversation face-to-face, but text or some other communication like that can really open the door. So that's a great point. Yeah. And there's no reason once you get that story kind of, pen to paper and have it written that you couldn't share or even verbally. Those are great stories to share with your advisory council, right? Because they're carrying, that was one of the themes when we said, who are your tribe, right? Who is your group that's going to help you share your message? And advisory councils were almost on everybody's list that they shared in the chat. So.
And I know a lot of you wouldn't feel comfortable doing this, but I've never met a stranger. A lot of you know that. And I have a lot of my parents and community members on my Facebook, and they feel on personal Facebook, and they feel comfortable in messaging, like Marianne said, more than that face to face. And I've got a lot of information. The person that in messaged me from the community about the family living in the vehicle did it through Facebook on an in message. So if you feel comfortable, and like I said, I feel comfortable, and I'm not going to put anything out there that they should, you know what I'm saying? So that is a good way too.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for sharing. Those are some great ideas, and I appreciate you jumping in. Any others before we move on? We could have time for one more if somebody wanted to share.
I went to college as an adult, and so a lot of the things that classes I took, I knew I would use. And one of them was about communicating with legislators and even, senators and all that from in the national showcase. And one of the things that we had to do is promote something like I think our class did physical education in schools. But one of the things that they did or taught us to do was how to make a fact sheet to give to legislators who you don't have a lot of time to talk to. And in recent years, I've gotten postcards from New Vista, and it says how many people they've helped, how many people they've done this for. And that's something that you can give, and they can look at the numbers. And then if they have questions, they can ask you about it. But it's just a really good little tool to get encompass all of what we do into their hands to know, well, if you want to know what moves the needle, 7,000 school supply requests have been met by the FRYSCKys this year, or, something like that. It was just a really good class that I learned a lot of things in, and I really, it was excellent. That's all I wanted to say is just that fact sheet was very helpful, and I've used it a lot too.
Thanks, Lynn. That's that data piece we talked about earlier, right? What kind of data? And thanks for sharing that, some of the data that you've seen or that you would use, because that's really important. That's, a piece of the messaging that we want to do. Advocacy initiatives at the local level. So while you're advocating there in your center, we just offered in this slide just some suggestions that we have. Now, you'll notice that some of these probably have changed with COVID, right? And so they're a little different, but some of them aren't even. So invite all decision makers and funders to open houses, parent nights, and programs. You can invite them if you're doing them virtually or if you're doing them in person. So don't ever forget that if you're doing them virtually and there's a Zoom link, and there's no reason you couldn't shoot that Zoom link to your legislator and say, hey, just wanted to invite you to this event. We're going to have students and parents there. If you wanted to hop on, say hello and see the work we're doing. We said go where they are going, but we know that not everybody, folks aren't going places like that as they typically would anymore, right? So, but there's still some of that going on. I have seen on Facebook, people are going back to ribbon cuttings. They're doing outdoors events, things like that, where stakeholders, legislators, and decision makers are going to be. So if there's something like that happening in your community and you have time to go ahead, make that, show up at that event, make that connection with that legislator. Send them a birthday card. Your stakeholders and folks that, that have a stake in what you're doing and the decision making, it makes you smile to get a birthday card, right? And you probably remember that person. Wasn't that nice? They sent me a birthday card this year. Friend or follow on social media. Paula mentioned this. Paula uses her personal Facebook page, and she friends and follows her legislators. So that's a great thing to do. And then share the information or the work that you're doing on your webpage. Don't forget that the decision makers, they have people in their lives that have influence on them too, right? So they may have spouses, kids, other family members. So if the person, if their busy schedule won't allow them to serve on your advisory council, maybe you want to check with their spouse. Would they have time to serve on that council and be a part of that? So don't forget those people. And put decision makers on your mailing list. If you're mailing things out, if you are doing, I've seen people talk about they have newsletters or flyers, things like that go out as a whole. Don't forget to add your decision makers to your mailing list. Paula, other things I've forgotten on that one?
No, you haven't forgotten anything. The only thing that I do sometimes is not only if I invite them to programs I do at school or parent nights or something, I try to give them something to do, like help with concessions. They're more apt to come if they know they have a job to do and their responsibility is to do something. Will you hand out the cookies? Will you help people sign in? If you give them something to do, they're more apt to be there.
And it makes them more comfortable too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the Christmas, sometimes I send Christmas cards, not only the birthday cards, I'll send a Christmas card. And if I find out they're going to be somewhere, like last year, I found out one of them was going to be at Hinton Mills at Flemingsburg. I said, Randy, I need to go to Flemingsburg. Don't you need some farm things? Just so I would be there and wear my FRYSCKy shirt, just, different things like that.
Yeah. And you can't be shy, as Paula mentioned. She never met a stranger, and I am very similar to that as well. And so you just can't be shy when you're talking to folks or reaching out or just saying hello, how are you today? Just simple things are really. It's just folks, just remember that no matter what their title is that they hold, it's just another person just like you are, and so that's important to remember as well.
Mary Ann, I'll
Yes.
add something in there too. Hi, everyone. I had boys group, so that's why I'm a little late. But I'll add to that. My legislator, particularly in this area, it's not a time that I don't reach out to Reggie Thomas. And if he can't make it, he lets me know that he can't make it. One time he showed up and I wasn't even here, but he showed up and he actually called me to tell me that he was here. And but he feels comfortable enough with being at my school to come on whether I'm here or not. And if he can't make it, he always tells me that he can't make it. I've had actually some other legislators have actually come to distribute out God's Pantry food boxes that aren't even my legislators for my area. So that's always just opening up to those legislators, even in your county, not just your legislator, but even in your county.
And I know one time last year, some of them in my region, we invited our legislators to a breakfast in a local place, and we went to breakfast, some of us in Region 5, and we just sat and talked with our legislator, and they were down to earth people just like we were, and asking what was going on at our schools. I think Danita and Lisa were there. I mean, they're just like Marian said, they're just people like we are.
And a good conversation strategy that I encourage you to remember is to have an ask, and not anything huge, but just an ask. So when you introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Marian Jennings. I'm the Assistant Director with Family Resource Youth Service Centers. We have a great program going on in such and such county, and I know that's one of yours. Would you like to stop by? Can I connect you with that coordinator to see if you could hear more about it? So think about an ask that you could have for that legislator, whether it be to stop by, whether it be to be involved in an upcoming event you have, something like that. That will help you with the conversation starter, but it would also help to give an idea of how they can be included in the work that you're doing too. So if you're going to introduce yourself, think of an ask that you can do for them as well. So. And don't be shy. That's one of the most important messages that we can give. Don't be shy. So I wanted to share with you, we've talked about, just to recap a little bit, as we've gone through here, we've talked about a lot of different things, but I also want to talk about our coalition and some of the advocacy efforts that they are doing that you might not know about, that we feel like are pretty important in the work that they've done. So every budget year, which traditionally is every 2 years, we know during COVID, they did a 1-year budget, but traditionally it's every other year. There's always some legislative event. This year, it's going to be a meet and greet on February 9th. We encourage you to participate in that. Right now, that is still a go. We're still planning on being there to meet and greet our legislators as they go into session between 12 and 2 on February 9th. It's also designated FRYSCKy Day in Kentucky, right, Paula?
Yes, and I look forward to it. It'll be a great opportunity to meet your legislators.
Yeah. Then on that off year before, oh, I'm sorry, somebody was going to say something.
I'm sorry to bother you, but in talking about the mini reset or the meeting on February 9th, planning on going, but I'm wondering, do we dress up for this event? Do we wear school attire? Do we wear? I was just curious about that because I hadn't heard anything, and I wondered if we should dress up since it's in the State House. There's always that question in my mind: how to be properly attired.
I would say business casual is appropriate if you want to incorporate in your school, your FRYSC shirt or something like that. I know that there are going to be some FRYSC masks available, so that would be on there. So if you want to dress a little more professional and use a mask to carry your message, you're welcome to do that. But I think probably business casual to business attire would probably be a good option. Paula, suggestions?
Yes, that's what I planned on wearing.
Yeah.
I mean, not.
I didn't know because sometimes people just wear like their school or the FRYSCKy t-shirts and stuff. And I feel like if you're going to be in the State House, you need to be dressed appropriately. So maybe you might want to send something out to people because I think it's a valid question.
Yeah. Okay. We'll work on that. On non-budget years, we've typically encouraged folks to meet in smaller groups there locally with their legislators. The Public Policy Committee that Paula and I are a part of, we schedule meetings with the legislative leadership almost every year, honestly, except when COVID was a barrier. But then we try to do those via phone calls, and we always try to include a constituent because legislators want to hear about us, but they truly want to hear about us if we have somebody there who is a constituent. And so we always try to include constituents in on any of those leadership meetings we do. We have opinion surveys that are given to all our stakeholders, and that is actually active right now. It is out there. You can, we hope you're sharing that with all your stakeholders because that's a really important survey. And we share that information with folks to let them know how we are supported in our school communities by not just our center staff, but that goes out to community members, superintendents, teachers, anybody associated with our centers. We hope that they're taking that survey so we can share that information. And then we have legislative promotional materials. So there's, I'm going to share the coalition's website here in just a minute, and we encourage you to use that. There's actually an advocacy tab on there with lots of great information that you can use. We do calls to action. So if there are funding issues that are out there, we send information out to coordinators and do calls to action and ask you to contact your legislators. Every year up until COVID, we've done tunnel decorations. And here's a picture of one of those that we put in the tunnel. The tunnel connects the annex to the Capitol, and legislators and staff walk through that tunnel every day. And so we reserve a week that we can spotlight Family Resource and Youth Services Centers during that week. We've done what's called a child in your pocket. And so thanks, Greg, for sharing that link. He sent the Survey Monkey. That's due Friday. So if you could send that out to folks, that would be wonderful. Back to the child in my pocket, where we have asked for coordinators to submit students, and we put them on a card and we give those to legislators so they can carry them in their pocket. And we've tried to update them as we can, but students who are receiving services are being helped by our centers. On the 25th anniversary, we did a Capitol rally that we felt like was really great. We do themed outreach. So like, I think it was last year before, we had a Valentine's Day theme, and FRYSCKs are the heart of Kentucky. And we had it on a button. We shared that with legislators. It just cost a few cents, but we felt like it really had an impact and kept the FRYSCKs in the forefront of legislators' minds. The coalition tries to produce helpful documents that I mentioned earlier, and then something that really takes a lot of time at public policy, puts a lot of effort into, is our FRYSCKy pages. And it is a great experience for kids. If you haven't I had a student who has been a page. I highly encourage it. Students that get to page 98% of the time have a wonderful experience. And so that is really, it's a win-win for everybody because our legislators see some of the work that our FRYSCKys do. And then it also is a great experience for a student. So I encourage you to do that. But that's just, we wanted to share with you some of the things that the coalition is doing. I also am going to ask Greg to put the link in the chat for the FRYSCKy webpage, where you will find that advocacy page. And on there is a great handout for tips. A lot of them we've talked about today, but it's really a good resource as you're developing information to share and advocate for family resource and youth services centers.
And the page days, like Mary Ann said, I know this several years ago, I had a page, and the summer after she graduated, she was in a car accident and passed away. And while at the funeral, her mother had a picture of her at page day, and she said that was one of her daughter's favorite parts of high school, was being a page. So it means a lot to the kids. They may not always say it, and I only heard it because of that, but you know, it's good for the kids.
Yeah, it really is.
And that's what we're there for.
Yeah. And so here's the website that I mentioned, and Greg also shared in the chat. And so that kind of concludes the information that we have. There's my contact information, Paula's contact information, if you have any questions or want clarification on anything that we've talked about. But we do want to offer, if you have any questions now, we're happy to, if you want to put those in the chat, we're happy to answer those.
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes, folks. So either if you'd like to come off mute and ask a question of our two presenters, or if you'd like to just type a question into the chat, we would love to answer any questions. Or
give us the tough stuff. We're ready. Thanks, Regina.
Yes.
We appreciate y'all taking the time to be with us today.
All right, well, we're waiting for some questions. I'm going to just take care of a few housekeeping items, but please, if you've got any questions, think about questions. And it could be another question about our legislative day on the 9th, because really we're doing this this Wednesday webinar exactly 2 weeks from that legislative day. So you'll actually have an opportunity to put all this great information that we just heard into practice in exactly 2 weeks. I do see a hand from Melissa Newton, so I'm going to call on her.
I do. I have my hand up. I can't miss this opportunity. I think my best friend would probably be very angry with me if I did, but my best friend is a legislative aide. She works for LRC, and so she is the assistant for several representatives. And I just want to put a plug out for those folks who are answering the phones, fielding the emails, taking the slips that they get. You know, like in the schools, you know, the secretaries know everything that's going on, and the LAs are like that with their representatives. So be nice to those folks. They're working super hard to make sure that their representatives know all the information that they need to know, and they're there to help you as well. So there, I did the plug. I'll have to tell my friend.
Okay. Also, February the 9th is also FRYSCKy Day in Kentucky. It's the second Wednesday, and the House wrote a bill, House Bill 347. Of course, they did it 2 years ago, and COVID hit, so it didn't get to go to Senate. It passed the House, but didn't get to go to Senate. But it's back up there again this year. It's House Bill 347. So it's to make the second Wednesday FRYSCKy Day in Kentucky from here on out. So I just want to let you all be aware of that. And we will be celebrating on February the 9th, FRYSCKy Day also.
And thanks, Paula, and thanks to Lynn, and hello to your students. who said hello. And Melissa, that's good information, because also on the day Paul is talking about, the February 9th, we encourage you to schedule some time with your legislator. If you're coming down to join us for the meet and greet, you can actually schedule to see them in their offices and talk to the legislative assistants that Melissa's talking about, that's her friend, and maybe just take 10 or 15 minutes, bring a handout, some information that they might be interested in, some of those stories that we were talking about sharing. And I am putting in the chat right now the number that you call to schedule your meetings with legislators. You call this number, you ask to speak to their office, whoever your legislator is. So, if it be Senator West, for example, is Paula's, so you would call the number that I have in the chat and ask to speak to Senator West's office, and then they will connect you to that legislative assistant, and hopefully you can get on their schedule for that day too. All of the legislators are housed in the annex, is where their offices are. So that would be where you would meet with them, would be in the Capitol Annex. And then our meet and greet that we're having is actually going to be in the Capitol. So.
All right. There was a question from Ann Brooks in the chat about, is there going to be a press release that they can share to stakeholders about FRYSC Day and about the legislative day? Do we know?
We did that last year, Mary Ann. Is that something we need to do?
As far as a press release about the day that Paul is talking about, the event, I don't know that there will be a press release, but there will be an invitation that will be shared that you can share with your legislator to attend that event on the 9th. And then as far as the actual day being declared FRYSC Day, until that has passed officially, we wouldn't have anything. But once it does, then I'm sure we'll do a press release at that time once it passes through the House, the Senate, and is signed by the governor. So that won't typically happen officially till later on in the session to have all that signed, and then we would do a press release at that point. So
what is it that they do? Is it a proclamation, Mary Ann?
A
citation. Each of them are going to do a citation in case it doesn't pass before February the 9th. But Senator West and Representative Cook said they had the citations ready also, in case it doesn't pass before then, but they want to get it passed. Representative Cook says this is FRYSCKy year. We want to celebrate. So
that's great. Okay, a couple more logistics. And again, any more questions, please come off of mute, put them in the chat. But we do have a couple of quick things to wrap up. So before you leave today, not right now, but before you leave, please make sure you click in the chat on the exit slip form. That's a chance to give us some great feedback on this particular webinar and on the webinar series. It's also one of the ways that we record that you were here today. So please make sure that you fill that out. And Paula and Mary Ann, originally this had been approved for a half hour because I thought we were going to do some breakouts, but that was such a great presentation that took the entire webinar. It is now approved for 1 hour of PD credit. The approval number is there in the chat, 134-2122. So go ahead. If you've been here for the whole thing, go ahead and fill out that exit slip and go ahead and add this onto your PD tracking form. We thank you for being here, for participating. If you did come in late on TC, I know you had something that was right before this. This is archived and will be available. That's why if you go up a little higher in the chat, and Melissa put it in earlier, we do have all the Wednesday webinars archived. So if you know of another FRYSCKy that couldn't be here today, let them know what a great webinar it was and what a great job Mary Ann and Paula did, and remind them that they can tune in at their convenience and still get all this great information.
Thanks for being here today, guys, and thanks for all the work you do. Coordinators are awesome people across the state doing great work, and I can't thank you enough for the work that you do. Keep sharing your story, and everybody have a great day. And hope to see everyone soon.
I said, I hope to see everyone February 9th.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.